Hello everyone, welcome to the Whiteboard. Today we're talking about the cyber attacker operational lifecycle. This is a way to depict the cradle to grave kind of interactions and operations of a cyber attacker. You're probably familiar with this, having seen it done by MITRE through their attack ATT&CK matrix, or perhaps other ways. We're going to talk about that. In fact, we'll actually line up the MITRE attack framework next to the cyber attacker operational lifecycle, so you can see how they complement each other. One does not necessarily replace the other. It's just a different way of looking at this. The operational lifecycle incorporates the fuller picture, if you will, though perhaps not into the level of detail that MITRE does, but I'll save that for a little bit later. And so we'll also take a second and talk about how it matches up to other things I've spoken of, such as data and data quality, and how hints and signals in that stream of data match up and where it matches up in the operational lifecycle model, as well as where evidence, indicators, and direct interaction may lie as well. So let's get to it. There are 6 parts of the operational lifecycle, and I'll just break them out for you here. I'm going to do this vertically just for simplicity, mainly because my board is vertical more than anything else. So it starts with planning, which no surprise, then goes into reconnaissance and build. Don't worry, we're going to define what some of these stand for and why we're all calling it that. Then it breaks into operate, which should be self-explanatory, the actual attack itself, and then the monetization cycle. Monetize. I'll just put monetize instead of monetization. And so with this structure, you can see as a life cycle where an attacker may plan, and planning can be very abbreviated, so a disorganized attacker would plan very little potentially, but they would still go through the planning phase. That could be as simple as I'm going to attack XYZ, or it could be a long drawn out, months long, years long kind of process of determination before they get out of the planning phase on how to move forward. In current events, as an example, the SolarWinds attack, which happened not too long ago, was a well-orchestrated, well-organized attack, at least in my opinion, and the planning phase on it was likely significant. It may have begun as something opportunistic, but moved into a planning phase as there was realization of what having compromised SolarWinds provided that particular attacker. And so that is something that, again, planning phase for the lifecycle would incorporate. And then next you move into reconnaissance. So this is not a waterfall, it's actually in a cycle. Normally I put these out as 6 items that are constantly in a circle. So you go to planning, you go to recon. If you learn something new in reconnaissance that you didn't incorporate in your planning, it's quite possible for you to fall back to planning and replan. In fact, you can see that constantly in the life cycle as things can fall back to previous phases, and frequently will. For example, let me zoom, well, no, I'll stay on topic, but planning especially. So you may be in a planning phase, they may go out and do reconnaissance. What do I mean by reconnaissance? It's absolutely what you probably think it is. Reconnaissance is where they go out and see not only what data do they have, but like in their repository. So if they're an organized attacker, they may have previously attacked you, or they may have attacked other folks that have relationships to you. So they would check, what do I know about you already? What can I find out? So there's something called the Darknet Corpus, which is just a marketing term for us measuring on a sine wave kind of how much data out there is you. How much data out there in the environment is yours. And so when it's at a low, that's good. When it's one of those things where it ages out. Generally, you look at this over 12 months, and what you look at is there's a trend line, let's say, and then there's the line where you're at. And what you want is this line to go down. You always want to be below the trend line, because there's 2 lines in Darknet Corpus that are important, and I won't spend too much time on this, but one of them is the trend, and the other one is the breakpoint. Now the breakpoint line is important, and it's got a couple of different names, but you always want to be below it, because that line indicates that there's enough data out there when you're above it that an attack against you could be executed, and is likely to execute, because there's so much information out there to tell them about you that it would make sense for them to capitalize on. So you always want to be below that as much as possible, and preferably even below the trend line, so that your risk levels are lower. But that's kind of off topic. So back here, refocusing in. So in reconnaissance, they'll look and see what they know, also what they can find out, what they can buy, what they can access. They also may do some elementary probing, typically depending on the type of attacker. So a more organized attacker will be who's risk adverse would do less reconnaissance actions that would give away their position. Ones that are opportunistic in nature and highly disorganized perhaps would just do things without regard to risk. They may just take a high risk, hammer brute force on your forms, crawl and move through all your infrastructure, check your forms, break your APIs, right? They may do all that very early because the risk for them doesn't matter. Even if you catch them, they're going to pivot and turn and pivot and turn, and they will just continue until they get tired or they just realize they're not going to meet their objective. So they're a type of attacker. And some of that may happen in reconnaissance that you may see, sort of things you can pick up. Planning is not something typically from a victim's perspective that you get an insight into until after the fact. But frequently, and I promised I would talk about signals and hints. So hints begin in this phase. Signals start happening here. And unfortunately, indicators, evidence, and direct, I'm just gonna put DI here, interaction happen in these latter two phases. So reconnaissance, what do I know about you? What can I find out about you? Build, can I take that information that I have determined about you and figure out what I need to put in place, what I need to orchestrate and build. You know, like, do I need an operational relay box so I have a jump point? Do I need like 10 of these, let's say? Do I need to buy a couple of /28s, maybe a /26 for some net range? Maybe I just need a couple IPs, so instead of buying it, I do a takeover. Right, I'm in this build phase of acquiring assets, building things, putting things in place. Maybe I need to craft a phishing kit or two around your brand to get to your people, or social engineer my way in. So I'll do some research. So I may buy some emails that someone has on you, or I may probe you with some phishing to pull out some information. Maybe I get into the communities that you like, right? I'm gathering this up in reconnaissance and building. And depending on what I find, I may fall back. Okay, I find out for example, you're very interactive and you allow your people to go to conferences. So I may fall back to reconnaissance, and in that cycle, pick up a lot of information on the conferences that your people normally attend, so I can get phone numbers and information about them, what they like, what they're maybe trained in, how well they're trained in, what classes they've attended. All that can be gathered from easily from conference information. The same thing for training. You know, I may find things on your website that you publicly talked about, you know, new business line, or you left, or you got rid of a business line, you merged with someone else, you shed someone else, you're trying out new products, you just purchased this, you know, some new fancy SIM, or you have just executed a new partnership, whatever. All that can force this to go back and forth, because I could take your partnership and create some knockoff domains, build some other infrastructure behind that, some watering holes, some attack infrastructure, and then move into my operational phase here, where I'm actually starting to capitalize on the things I've learned about you and what I know and what I've put in place. And I begin the active phase, if you will, of probing the edge, doing account takeovers, seeing if I can get into your VPN, seeing if I can land on your network. Is there initial access sales and initial access capability? Can I brute force, or, you know, just take you offline, unsettle, you know, see how you activate your SOC in relation to attacks? I mean, I can figure out all this right here. And I may learn something in the operational phase and fall back and rebuild, recon, rebuild, operate again until I'm ready and I actually get into the attack phase. In the attack phase, I have attacked you. I'm on your network. I'm performing things. And in fact, this is where, in a second here, as we talk about it, you'll see that MITRE does really well describing this. But in the attack phase, I get in, there's initial access, there's elevation of privileges, you get into credential movement, you get into lateral movement, you gain access to wider, broad net parts of the network, maybe to higher level permissions, until you find the information you want. That's your objective. You talk to your command and control and continually interact there, and eventually you exfil and you leave, and you move into a monetization phase. And you might stay there for a while. An organized attacker may land, attack, gather information, exercise on making money from it or getting advantage or influence or power or whatever, and come back and have this cycle here until either you kick them out or they get tired enough or they gather enough from you and they shut down. Any of those are possible. They could even get all the way into the monetization phase and fall back to replanning and go back through the whole cycle. That's why it's a life cycle. And then they could do that even if they're still inside your network. Just because they leave the attack phase doesn't mean that they have completely exited. And it's very frequent that we talk about things like dwell time, which is a really simple term that says how long were they in your network. But also, in addition to dwell time, there's also an activation or operational time that often gets overlooked. It's like, okay, it's a subset of dwell. It's like maybe they're in there for 9 months and they were active for a total of 3 months over, say, 4 periods. But these periods match this cycle of activity, where they may fall back to planning, reconnaissance, build, go back and continue the attack, monetize on it, maybe reoperate and go on. Who knows? They could just sit here. That's where you figure that out from the details of the incident or the activity you're trying to keep an eye on. And so the life cycle helps you capitalize on that and understand it. It also helps you understand and break out a little bit of your data quality. So when I talk about hint and signals, which is outside versus inside intelligence here, when you're in this outside intelligence realm, it's really important to understand that when you see things in the planning and reconnaissance phase, you're getting hints of activity. And we often match this up with Darknet Corpus. So if I see a large volume of data out there on you and I see new infusions, sometimes during this phase, as part of the life cycle, they will early monetize. They gather up what looks like valuable information. They may resell that or make it available, even if they're still going to execute it on themselves. A lot of reasons why there, I won't get into it at the moment, but you could start getting hints of activity against you that you could capitalize on and understand as early as their planning and reconnaissance phase. Because in planning, what do? You gather data, you put information together, people have a meeting of minds, they generally rough out a plan or go into real detail on a plan. And in that phase, you have to reach for things just like we would reach for things. So when we plan anything, if we're just normal Joe or normal company, you go out and you gather information, you do research, you search through all your sources, and the same sources that you use are the same kind of sources that an attacker uses. They capitalize on search engines, they call on experts, they check repositories, etc. I mean, they do the same things you do, right? You may call in a consultant who's an expert, you may check for a repository, you may go and say, okay, this is a Python problem, there's a great repository out there for Python in the internet, so you may go and you may pose questions or just read information. You're worried about a piece of software or technology, whether it has an exploit or something, you will go out and get experts, you go to repositories to gather data, and so will the criminals. They'll do the exact same process. And that can give you hints, because some of that activity, not all of it, but some of it can be measured. Planning is the hardest thing to get insight into and requires you to have access to outside intelligence, which if you're a cybersecurity professional or intelligence analyst inside of an organization, typically that's a service that you outsource to that gathers that information up and makes it available to you either for analysis in a raw state, or they make refined intelligence available to you to gather that information from, and you can give them requests. It just kind of varies. There's lots of situations out there. But even if you miss the hints of what's going on or they roll up enough, when you get into these phases here, you get key signals of activity happening. Right? In the build and operation phase, this is when you would see knockoff domains, you see infrastructure movement, you may see file acquisition, you may see testing on VirusTotal or some repositories where people are trying out files that would work in your environment or are oriented for your environment and your IPs or your infrastructure, however you're set up, goes on. Just depends, there's some variance in here, but this is your best chance to head off any attack, is this line. You want to get this line, you want to get above that line and use your outside intelligence to shut down an attack as much as possible. And there's a lot of reasons why. I mean, if you want just a quick sidebar, it doesn't matter how often you pen test, it doesn't matter how often you have assessments, it doesn't matter how many audits you do, it doesn't matter how much technology you throw at this problem or people you hire. If you only can find things after this line, it's already inside your network, the attack is already executed. These don't matter anymore. All they do is make you feel better for the most part. They can help you meet a regulatory requirement. They can make you understand the breadth and attack. They can give you possibilities, which is what pen testers are really good about. Assessments can tell you things that you should have done or could have done. Same things for audit. And then the tech you get can either help or hinder you or do both. And people, it's the same thing. But that all happens here. Unless you actually disrupt things outside of your network before it gets to you, you will always be after the attack, after the problem exists. These things can help you make this easier, but without outside access and capability to look out, you're always going to be blind to an attack coming in. All right, I'll get off my soapbox there for a second, but that's why it's important to have signal intelligence and hint data so that you can do something about the attack before it gets to you. Otherwise, you just have to suffer through it and hope that your defenses are strong enough that the impact is not horrible, which is kind of important as well, but to me not as important. Prevention definitely is always better than after the fact kind of activity. You don't, for example, you don't wait to get cancer to eat healthy. You should eat healthy as a byproduct of your life so that you don't get it, right? It's a prevention piece. We could talk forever on exercise and food and so forth. Everybody knows what to do. Doing it is hard, right? Just like words are hard, taking actions sometimes that are good for you are incredibly hard. It's much easier to eat chips than it is to eat a balanced diet for most people. It's just how we're raised, part of our culture, and a lot of other things. I don't want to get into the needs, wants, and requirements discussion. We had something on that, but basically it fits in that model. All right, I said I would talk about the MITRE matrix. Let me do that. I know I flipped the names here, but let's talk about their setup. So if you look at where MITRE has visibility, MITRE's best grasp, if I had to give them, I don't know, I'm just going to do X's here. If I had to give them let's do this, 0 to 5 as a grade. When it comes to MITRE, especially, their visibility is best right here. And I would put them at a 5. When it comes to seeing the operation attack part of the life cycle, they have it down. From initial access to exfil, they have a great depiction of what happens during these life cycle parts, these phases, these circles as they swing. They have a much, much, much lesser view of some of these areas. Like here, I'd say 1 to 2. Here, I'd say 1 to 3. Here they have nothing, and here they have nothing. Their matrix cannot incorporate this, or doesn't currently incorporate this. So if you look at the matrix for enterprise, it talks a little bit about resource development. That's what they mean by the build phase. That's where they're acquiring infrastructure and all the things I earlier related out. They have some bit on reconnaissance. It's probably more of a 2 or 3, if I had to really be objective, where they have some idea on what comes into reconnaissance. It's much, much broader than what they attribute in there, but that's fine. This is a growing, living document, which is awesome because they keep making it better, especially as they incorporated like the pre-attack and the attack into one matrix and made it much simpler. But it's tough to see these things. You have to know what to do. Worse, because we don't have a unified taxonomy or even agreement, what constitutes each part of these, that's part of the struggle on why that isn't necessarily updated, though they are well accepted and should be. They do a lot of excellent good and help people do have a unified way to talk about things. And luckily, in my eyes at least, the MITRE matrix and the attack framework has showed up more and more in tools as people are using it as a unifying effort. And any unifying effort is good, as far as I'm concerned here. But they miss some areas, critical areas. They can only monetize, and they don't have planning. So they miss out on 2 of the 6 portions of the cycle that help understand why things are happening here in the middle. So there you go. That's a breakdown of the life cycle, kind of organized against the matrix with a little bit of talk about the data types that you'd see in each one. Again, as a kind of a capstone to this, definitely do your best, whoever you are and wherever you're situated. If this is something that you have an impact on strategically, do your best to focus them on as much prevention as possible. Prevention does not mean buying things. You can't, for example, buy technology to do good prevention here. A little bit, but not really. Firewalls help, SIMs help, looking at data helps, threat hunting helps, absolutely. All those things are awesome. They mostly happen right here. And they don't necessarily do prevention. The only things I know of currently that does prevention is companies that focus on this kind of external intelligence and can provide it to you in a fast enough pace and a good velocity so that you can take action on it. Preferably they not only inform you, which some of them are very good at, but they give you capabilities to act on it. This is the one thing I see that's missing the most in almost every company. It's one thing for me to tell you that someone's talking about you. It's one thing for me to tell you that someone is buying your data, that someone is selling your data. It's another thing if I tell you that this is happening, here's what we can do about it. We can, work to make that data hard to acquire. We can work to destroy the reputation or impugn the reputation of that criminal who's selling it. We can talk about the quality of that data and try to cast dirt on it so that somebody who would potentially buy it would be deterred from doing so because they think the quality is poor. You could actually acquire it in yourself, which I don't suggest necessarily, because why feed them monetarily? There are too many activities that can be done to basically counterback that activity. You can even know that that's, get informed that that's there, have us gain as much access to it as possible, or at least the category of what it is, and then you could take actions internally to kind of head it off, even though that's very passive. I'm more of a fan of active activity, and so I would rather go out there and disrupt what they're doing, redirect them in a different way, or take away their capability they're trying to sell or capitalize on because I've gotten hints and signals. Or if I see knockoff domains and I see the IP ranges they're going into, understand that there may be negative activity coming out of there, and then work with the owner of that particular IP, that subnet, IP range, whatever, and see if we can do something there, or at least be ready to act on it and help you here, right? There's so many things you can do if you know outside intelligence. Okay, I'll get off that soapbox. That's a different talk. Today, just kind of touching on the operational lifecycle. And hopefully you like this video. If you do, please press like. And as always, if you'd like what you see and you want to keep up to date, please subscribe to our channel as we come out with these pretty much daily at this point. Hopefully we'll keep that pace up. I suspect so. We'll continue to do the whiteboard lectures, whiteboard discussion, as well as slide lectures and other informational items to someone who is in threat intelligence and cybersecurity. Thank you.